Welcome to Today in Space, and we're back for another episode of People of Space. This week, we get to talk with Andy Crocker, and we get to get a look into what this podcast has been covering for about a decade here. Andy was deep into this in the background, doing the work of aerospace engineering and so much about the human landing system, and we're going to talk all about that in a second. But Andy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be on.
Yeah, thank you. And so let's have you introduce yourself to the folks and just give like a background of where you came from and really like what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, great. So I'm an aerospace engineer for 30 years. I've worked in the space part of aerospace, not commercial aircraft or other things. A little bit of defense work, missile defense and hypersonics, but a lot of work with NASA, a lot of work with commercial space. I've always been on the industry side, so supported the government most of my career, but I've always been on the side of industry. I fell in love with aerospace in eighth grade. I did a science project on space stations, and just said to myself, "Hey, this is what I want to do."
Mm.
Actually, really wanted to be an astronaut, and maybe we get into that a little bit later, but that didn't work out. But I, fell back to aerospace engineer, which is almost as cool. And yeah, I've had a great opportunity to work on great projects, really forward-leaning projects. A lot of advanced concepts in my career, and then, like you said, the human landing system. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, take me back to like was it becoming an astronaut that kind of sparked your interest in diving into this really intense world of aerospace engineering, or like was there what in your childhood, like what drove you there?
Yeah, like I said, I knew I liked math and science,
Mm.
and a lot of people don't start thinking about what they want to be. I mean, I wanted to be a quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. I wanted to be, uh, but when you really start thinking about realistic career choices, it can be anything, and sometimes nothing really sparks until you get into college. But for me, it was that science project
Mm.
and thinking about space stations. I kind of designed one, as you do as an eighth grader.
Oh, that's so cool. That's
It
fun
probably
though.
looked exactly like NASA's got probably copied it. But and this was Space Station Freedom. This was way before ISS.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, way back. But um, just at that time, I said, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to work in space, and I was really thinking aerospace engineer. But as I really got into it and thought more about what the options might be,
Mm.
I started thinking about astronaut. And I talk in the book some about this, that I probably, if I really wanted to be an astronaut, I would have and should have put more effort into that. And we can talk more about what that means.
Mm.
But the good news is that I had invested myself in aerospace engineering, for a major, and had some good internships that allowed me to, move in that direction. So that helped a lot. And then, even though I was really disappointed I couldn't be an astronaut when I found out, I it wasn't it didn't take too much to fall back, and still appreciate, hey, still get to design spacecraft for people and robots, and as it turns out, work with astronauts and things like that. So not too bad.
That's very cool. Let's touch on your book real quick.
Sure.
Because so I've got so the title here is The Unconditionals,
Yeah.
Five Timeless Values to Live Without Limits and Ignite Your Superpower.
Yeah.
Um, what sparked that, and like where did the book come from?
Right. So two major things really got me working on it. I've always written sort of on the side,
Hmm.
but never really something like this. And worked on the human landing system program and lost. And I talk about this in the book. This is sort of the way I introduced the book, that, we were competing. We were one of three companies competing to actually design the lander to go to the moon. And, it was our company, Blue Origin and SpaceX. And so, it kind of felt like us against Elon and Jeff, right?
Sure.
Um, but we didn't win. We had two opportunities, two kind of final final competition things and didn't win either time. And we had just a fantastic team. It was an absolute blast to work on. It was about 5 years that we worked on it. But you get to the end of that and you think, okay, what am I going to do now?
Right.
Um, and so the way I say it in the book is, I had a purpose. I had this great purpose, the holy grail for aerospace engineer designing
Yeah.
a lunar lander for crew. And I step back and say, well, what's my purpose now? And what is purpose? What does that even
Mm,
mean? And at the same time, the other thing is that my kids, were growing up. My son became a senior in high school, and I'm like, wow, I really need to get down on paper what I want my kids to know is important in life. And so as I started writing it, I realized that there's a lot more to success than your career, a lot more than just your projects are successful or you get a promotion or you make a lot of money. And I really, dug into that and it turned out to be a lot more than I expected. It wasn't just a pamphlet for my kids or, something on notebook paper. But the main thing that I really realized and was kind of an aha moment for me is that the unconditional aspect of these values, that it's one thing to have these values and to try to live them, but
mm,
living them unconditionally, which means not based on circumstances, not based on how other people treat you or how other people look or what your outcome might be or what could happen if things go wrong. Independent of all that,
mm.
you need to have these values in your life and strive for unconditionality in these five values. And that really struck me, and it's actually meant a lot to me in terms of how I think about the way I'm trying to be and how I'd love for my kids to try to be. So I
Mm.
turned it into a book, and it's meant a lot to me, and I hope other people find it useful.
Yeah. I can tell you I have been on a journey of living a life of values. And it's that's a journey in itself. And I think
Mhm.
um a lot of people, even if you're not in the aerospace or engineering fields, like
Right,
it's a thing that's across all walks of life. And I feel
of
like
course.
the last 20 years have been living with so many options
Right.
that if you don't know your values or if you're not like paying attention to them, you
Yeah,
can find yourself sliding down and then
exactly.
realizing where am I? Who am I? What do I believe in? You know?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I love the way you put that sliding down. That's exactly the way I put it in the book. Actually you say, these values and really any values, but particularly I focus on these. If you may have the right intent, but if it's based on things outside of you, if it's based on external factors, your situation, other people, whatever, you can quickly slide down to the negative end of that spectrum from, love to hate, from
Yeah.
integrity to disintegrity, um, very quickly. And
Mm.
so you've got to separate yourself from that slide and try to be unconditional. But you're right, it's a journey. It's very clear in my book. It's an ideal, which means we're not ever going to get there, right?
Yeah,
You're
absolutely.
like driving towards the sun on the horizon, and
hmm
you're never going to get there, but you keep your eyes on it.
Yeah. And that's engineering in a lot of
Yeah,
ways, right? It's
that's
like
right.
we have all the best plans in the world, all the best
Right,
theoretical things, but as soon as that stuff gets made, it's a whole and used, it's a whole other
right.
story. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Engineering is a great training ground for life. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So t tell me more about like when you first, so the company that you were working for
Mm.
with the human landing system, when did you get started there and how did your path look like? Because we have a lot of folks who listen to the podcast who they may have gotten a STEM degree, but they don't work in STEM anymore, but they're still curious. And I think people have been engaging the most with like learning how different career paths go. And I think that's super
Yeah,
valuable. So I'd
yeah.
love to know your path just there and how that happened.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you two aspects.
Mm,
One for myself, and then one for a number of people who ended up being on the team who were really not in aerospace or not in the space part of aerospace who ended up being on the team. So I'll talk about both. First, for myself, back at the end of 2018, I think it was, is when NASA said, "Hey, we're gonna try to go back to the moon with people again."
Mm.
And then the very beginning of the next year, um, Vice President Pence at the time came to Huntsville. I live in Huntsville, Alabama. He came here and said, "Hey, the Trump administration says we're going to the moon by 2024." And of course, we're still waiting. But
2025.
it obviously injected a lot of excitement and a lot
Hmm.
of energy and also a little bit of a rush. But at the same time, nobody had really done anything meaningful about getting back to the moon since 1972, right?
Yep.
I mean, Apollo 17. So we weren't really behind. My company had not done anything like this. We had
Mm.
we had won some good NASA contracts. We had some success, but we hadn't done anything like this. But the good news, or at least for us, was nobody had.
Right.
Everybody had done studies, but we weren't really behind in terms of lunar lander. So I actually was the one who went to my boss and said, "We ought to do this. We ought to take a shot at this."
Yeah.
So we threw our hat in the ring and got a chance with I think it was 12 total companies, either 11 or 12 total companies who got a small study contract to
Mm.
begin. And NASA was still figuring out how they wanted to do it. I mean, they had a 2028 goal in mind,
Mm.
and Trump and Pence said, "Wait a minute, you're going to go 2024." So they had to completely redo their plans. This was,
Yeah.
right at the beginning of that. And so our initial studies were on a very different approach than what we ended up doing. But when we got through that first study, then it was okay. Now you're gonna because we're in this much faster timeline. NASA says now you got to actually design the real thing, and you got to
Mm.
show how you can get there by 2024. So at the time, I went to my boss and said, we have to do this. It's like a moral imperative that we go after this
Yeah.
because we have a shot. I mean, we had what we thought was a great design and
I love the design. I mean,
oh, thank
honestly,
you.
yeah, we were
Thanks.
following it, and you guys
Yeah.
being in the mix there at the end was very exciting. I mean,
Oh, it was awesome. Yeah,
yeah.
and I still love the design. I have models of it and on my desk, in fact. And so it was a lot of fun, but getting to compete against, the big name companies that everybody in the world literally knows.
Yeah.
And we were the no names that people were like, who? Um, that was fun. That was a lot
Yeah.
of fun. And I was talking to somebody recently and said, we were kind of an underdog because nobody knew who we were, and that was fun. It was nice. It actually probably relieved some of the pressure that we would have felt otherwise
Right.
because nobody expected us to do as much as we did. So literally, it was initiative. Like I
Mm.
really want to do this, and I think we can do this, and the situation is unique because nobody else had been there that allowed us to get into it.
Yeah.
But I was in a really unique spot and be able to kind of help push that and make that happen.
Mm.
When we got the first big contract, and it was us and Blue Origin and SpaceX, obviously we had a small team. We had to build the team quick.
Right.
And so we, said, "Hey, we're hiring." And I spent so much time in the first 3 or 4 months um, interviewing people
Mm.
and making offers. But one of the really cool things was we talked to some great folks who were automotive engineers, who
Mm.
were, people who had worked on commercial aircraft at Gulfstream, people who were um, designers like industrial design folks, but they wanted to work on a lunar lander, right?
Yeah.
And if they're super talented and passionate about this program, of course we're going to hire them.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that they don't have the background in space specifically. If they can do the work, we absolutely want them. So we ended up with a fantastic team, and really the core team leadership was just a great group that stayed through pretty much the whole time. And I mean, half maybe of them had not worked on a space program before,
Wow.
but they had great, thermal design experience, great
Mm.
industrial design experience, great experience with uh, autonomous vehicles, all those kinds of things.
Mm.
So it was a real proof that um, you don't have to have worked in space to be able to get on with a space program. And
Mm.
a lot of those folks moved on and either are working for Blue or SpaceX or, another cool program now because they wanted to stay with space.
Yeah. What were you looking for? I mean, you kind of said it, but were you looking for, before you met these people that weren't in the industry, did you go into it thinking about who you were looking for? Were there certain traits or things when you're trying to look for these people that you're thinking about?
Yeah, so I've hired hundreds of people in my
Yeah,
career, and it does depend somewhat on the project, but in general, I think what I and a lot of folks that I've worked with look for is, yeah, you want people who have shown that they care about their grades. They don't have to be
sure.
4.0 students, right? But at
Right.
least they cared,
Mm,
um, and that they are well-rounded. They're not just completely focused on one thing. I mean, yeah, if they're super passionate about space, maybe they're, blinders on, focused on space stuff. That's something. But really well-rounded, and then show a real interest in space. So
mm,
they could be doing anything else in their career, but if they show that they're really interested in space, and obviously convinced us that there was a something there, then it mattered. And then a lot of the time we were looking for people with hands-on experience. I mean,
sure.
they don't have to be mechanics.
Hmm.
There are a lot of car gearheads who got on the team, but a lot of folks who weren't. But they just like to be very hands-on, involved in
Yeah.
whatever they were doing, whatever that means. So all those things are great traits to have, and then sometimes it's just, hey, this person's going to be a great teammate. Maybe he or
Yeah.
she is just coming out of college, they don't have any experience, but they're going to be a great teammate. You can just tell by talking to them. They're going to be a glue person for the team.
Yeah.
We want them on the team.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that because I think, especially for people who are trying to get into the space industry and feel like imposter syndrome or I'm not skilled enough for this, I think that's a really important thing to hear is that, at the end of the day, it's about being a part of a team. And
Yeah.
like that is a really, when you're so skill obsessed,
Mhm.
you can kind of lose track of that.
Right.
Um, so could you tell me a little bit more, like going back to like the Apollo era, you touched on something.
Mhm.
And even leading up to that, like the people that worked on that, it had never been done before. So it's not
Right.
like there was like an expert to be done. So like even in the
Yeah.
most glorious sense of space, which is that era, like
Yeah.
those they didn't know what they were doing either. They were writing the book about it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It blows my mind. It just blow. I mean, we're 60 years really past when they started.
Yeah.
And it's only now, I mean, really, really, when we started, when NASA said, hey, we're going to go and commercial industry is going to be much more involved and really going to kind of lead, it was only then that the technologies necessary to do it made it to industry. I
Mm,
mean, obviously a lot of the, computer chips and thermal management and autonomy and all kinds of things have advanced, many fold in the recent decades. But just all the things that are necessary weren't in the hands of industry until really, 10 years ago or less.
yeah.
So it just blows my mind that 60 plus years ago, folks who had none of that, I mean, it hadn't been invented yet, were able to, with literally pencil and paper
Mm,
and brains,
yeah.
design these things, and had the very very few failures that they did on the ground and elsewhere. It's mind-boggling, and the fact that we're still trying to get to the moon, but all the other things we're still trying to do in space, and it's hard. It's just
Yeah.
hard.
Well, I want to jump to that next because so we live in this kind of glorious age where we just spent the last decade coming from what felt like a complete break and almost stop of the space program with the shuttle dying, at least from an iconic sense for the
Yeah,
nation, I think.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we had this decade of just like acceleration of the access to space.
Hmm.
And now we've got all these companies going to the moon.
Hmm.
Firefly being the only one successfully doing it.
Hmm.
iSpace, unfortunately, not landing number two. Intuitive
Right.
Machines not landing number two.
Right.
Um, the moon's really hard to land on, right? And like
Right.
the Apollo, what they did on Apollo 11 is even that much more
Exactly.
insane that they did it.
It really is. It really is. Now, it's worth noting that their machines were intentionally much simpler. We're
Mm,
trying to do more, and that's part of the problem.
sure.
We're making it harder, but
Mm,
we do have the technology.
yeah.
We can do it, and we've made mistakes. One of
Mm,
the things I say in the book, and this is really for kind of for folks who aren't uh, space folks, is
mm,
something you don't think about until you work on space programs. You spend years and years on this, and there are a million things that have to go right. But if one thing goes wrong, everything ends. And
yeah.
even especially with some of these recent commercial landers, everything goes right. Great mission all the way to the moon, and then the very last thing goes wrong.
Yeah.
So um, I mean, they're fantastic companies. They have super smart people, great teams,
Yeah.
awesome technology, and something just went wrong. So
Hmm.
it's so hard, and it's just absolutely it should blow everybody's mind that the Apollo folks were able to do what they did.
Yeah. Yeah, and it really it's kind of like that thing where people think someone's an overnight success and then you look into it and you're like, "No, this person's been doing it
Right.
forever." Like it was Apollo 11 that landed on the
Right.
moon and there was
Yeah.
Mercury and Gemini before it. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of mistakes that they figured out along the
Yeah.
way, you
Yeah.
know?
A lot of mistakes, a lot of amazing successes. I mean, Apollo Soyuz, I still
Yeah.
am so amazed at that one. But one of the things I mentioned I talk about in the book is Apollo 1.
Mm,
And obviously in the Apollo program and really most of the space program until Challenger, Apollo 1 was the tragedy that everybody talked about.
mm,
That, I mean, of course, it wasn't because of that Apollo 11 was successful, but the attention to detail that was added and the additional preparation and all the things that went into the program after Apollo 1 when they realized it can't happen this way. We've got to change how we do things. um, it just went through it forced them to go through all these different aspects of I talk about Endeavor as the fifth unconditional, all the different things you go through, especially perseverance, and then
mm,
growth, which is what you want to get. Sometimes it requires failure. You
yeah.
certainly don't want to lose people's lives when you fail, but you learn from failure, and hopefully you grow from it. And certainly the fact that they didn't lose anybody else. I mean, Apollo 13 was as amazing as anything, maybe more, but
Yeah.
the fact that they didn't lose anybody else just shows that they learned so much after Apollo 1. It's amazing, and there's so many stories that can be told about that program.
Yeah. One of the gems that I found right around this human landing system era
Hmm.
was the manual that
Hmm.
they left from that era. Could you tell folks a little bit about that?
Well, when we started working on Human Lander, we spent a lot of time. So I'm lucky to live in Huntsville. There are a ton of things there at the Space and Rocket Center here. If you haven't been, please go. It's a fantastic place. So there's, especially on the propulsion side, there's a ton of
Mm,
things to go look at from that era. Um, and then of course in Washington D.C. So looked at things up there, but then really looking at the manuals, and there's so many fantastic books that people have put together pulling together those manuals. So literally, there's a manual for the lunar lander, and you look at the not the blueprints, but the drawings and some of the specs. Now,
mm,
the vast majority of them are out of overcome by events, so to speak, because the technology has advanced so much more. But
right.
but it's still really informative. We're still standing on their shoulders,
Yeah.
um, and it's a lot of fun to look at those.
Yeah. It tells you a lot about like what it means to go to space. And I think uh it's really an adventure. And I think I'm learning more about like what that means. And to your point, the failures being a part of it. If you look
Mhm.
into in the classic sense, the hero's journey, right? uh, in a lot of ways, that's what going to space is and what you have to do. And I think that's why your book about the unconditional is so important because it's going to test you
Right,
along the way. It's not
right,
going to be easy. But
right,
like it's those things that keep you together and fighting through that.
right, right. Yeah, it's it's amazing to me in from two different perspectives
Mm.
where we are today in terms of um, common folks being able to go to space. You know, not
Yeah.
non multi-decade trained astronauts going to space. It's amazing for one reason, you know, that people can do it, that so many have done it, and many, many,
Yeah.
many more are going to do it, you know, soon. It's amazing on the other side, in that I've been in the industry 30 years, and I thought at the beginning of my career people would be doing it soon. So that it
Yeah.
is so hard and it's taken so long. But the thing that I know will happen, unfortunately, before too long, is it'll become commonplace.
Mm.
People will think, you know, take it for granted. And yeah, it's hard. I know eventually we will make it as safe as flying in an airplane, right?
Yeah.
Eventually. But the thing that I've thought a lot about recently is when more people are going to space and have a chance to look back at Earth,
Mm.
and this is something all of the astronauts talk about, that the perspective that you get looking at the Earth from space, particularly from the moon,
Mm.
but even in Earth orbit, gives you a completely different perspective on our little problems here on the planet,
Yeah.
right? And you know, you can't see the borders between countries, and you
Yeah.
can't see the fights going on the ground, and all of that stuff kind of vanishes, and you realize, you know, there's 8 billion people on this little ball in the middle
Yeah.
of this vast universe.
Yeah.
That I'm excited about. There's a great book called Overview Effect
Hmm.
that I think it's in its fourth edition, and I just finished reading it the other day. That talks about that, and
Really good book.
it's uh, it's a great thing to think about. A lot more people having that perspective
Mm.
of, hey, we got to take care of this planet and each other
Mm.
because you know, it's one thing to be in the mix of it, but it's another thing when you can step back and see literally the big picture.
Yeah. And that's where space and being involved in something like aerospace engineering is really deep at the end of the day. And like it's so technical just to
Yeah,
like make it happen. But
yeah,
man, it's one of the deepest things that you can be a part of, you know?
yeah, yeah. It is. The astronauts, especially the ones who went to the moon, just have
Mm.
incredibly philosophical and emotional, you know, responses to their experience.
Yeah. And we're at this kind of similar place with the humans of that era that just in a lot of ways like what manufacturing in America is going through right now. I came from the tool making world, so um, the machinists like there's so many people who are so skilled and trained and just had next level abilities to make things, and you know we still have some of them left, thank goodness, and you know the transfer of that knowledge and what we do with that with this next generation is very interesting. And space is going through that now
Mhm.
with very, you know, luckily a decade of, you know, good private industry support of the public effort. Um, I don't know. I definitely want to do more to try and connect with the people that we still have with us, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was something that was exciting earlier in my career. Um, I was able to meet and connect with and learn from folks who were still around from either the beginning of shuttle, or there were a few that were still around from Apollo.
Yeah.
Especially here in Huntsville, there were a number, very, very few anymore. The ones now really were from the very end of Apollo, maybe, or certainly still the beginning of shuttle. But yeah, the knowledge they have, the just the experience of you know, building something from nothing is amazing to learn from. One of the things that I think has really been exciting the last probably 5 years is now that there are a handful of very successful companies in the private space world, um, they have spawned so many others because
Yeah.
people, they'll go to a SpaceX or a Blue Origin or, a Northrop Grumman or Boeing or whatever, but
Hmm.
then they'll go somewhere else and start a company or join another company. But that has really, like I said, just in the last 5 years, really expanded um, the capabilities because people are trying to, 3D print rockets, and
Yeah.
so many propulsion companies have sprung up that are doing really cool propulsion technology, um, and autonomy and communications and all kinds of the stuff that, if they had stayed at one company, wouldn't have happened and really would have been one company's IP. But
Mm.
now they're taking it out and they're developing their own intellectual property. So that's really exciting to see, and I'm really happy that that's finally happening.
I agree. And I think the private sector has been very interesting. I came at it from it being very difficult in the 2010s to
Mhm.
find a job in aerospace engineering
Mhm.
to this new era where there's so much of it. Um, it seems like a really good hedge against the ever twisting whims of the political, whoever is in charge,
Right.
and the space program was plagued with that with George Bush and just Constellation and back and forth where do you see right now this private public space program that we have going on? What's good about it? What's challenging about it?
Yeah. I think the challenge that still exists across most of the commercial space industry is that not many folks have proven that you can make a really good business case out of some of these, more exciting but more leading edge plans. So,
Mm,
commercial space stations, fantastic idea, needs to happen absolutely.
yeah.
But how many companies can really make money in the near term doing that?
Mm,
I don't know.
yeah.
Um, I am so excited. I can't wait to see how the lunar infrastructure develops. I mean, that is absolutely necessary,
Yeah.
not just footprints and flags, but actually developing habitats and power systems and long-term communication systems all over the globe of the moon.
Mm,
Um, but can you make a business case from that? I don't know.
mm,
Maybe in the near term, maybe not.
yeah.
It's good that there are a couple of billionaires, a few billionaires involved in space.
Yep.
There used to be a joke that if you want to be a millionaire in space, you need to start as a billionaire. But that doesn't
No,
work
it was
anymore
true.
because
That historically that was correct.
yeah, now it's not true because they just keep making more and more money in the other side of the business. But no, I'm clearly, there are companies making money and companies are successful, and that's great because it shows it can be done. But they're making money in sort of the standard ways,
Mm,
getting things in orbit, putting satellites in orbit, beaming internet down to Earth, those more traditional ways. I think it's going to be quite a few more years before we really see those more leading edge technologies
mm,
show prove a good business case. I don't know that there's any small launch company, like truly small launch company, that's really shown that they can make money. I think Rocket Lab is probably the closest, but they're
yep.
beyond what I would call small. Um, and SpaceX, they leaped past small a long time ago.
Hmm.
But a lot of the
Yeah.
companies who have been trying to do small launch on a smaller scale, it's hard to make money. So
Yeah.
all that stuff will get fleshed out, and I would imagine there'll be one or two companies that compete in those different arenas, and eventually we'll figure out how to make money. But that to me is the biggest question. It's great that there's so many people with lots of money, not just the billionaires, but the venture capitalists and hedge funds and whatever investing in space.
Mm,
That has, I mean, it's just blown my mind how much money is going into space now, and that is really really exciting
yeah.
because that will eventually push things towards um, making money, which obviously makes more things happen. But
Hmm.
uh, I still think we're so far on the front. We're just barely on the front end of this commercial wave into space, and um, absolutely, it's going to be, space will be conquered by commercial entities. I think government still will um, lead the way in developing key technologies. I think that's a key thing that NASA and other
Hmm.
government entities will do, no matter what happens with the budget or whatever. I think there's certain technologies that only government will be willing to invest in until the risk, gets driven down.
Sure.
Uh, but I think it looks like commercial entities will eventually be the ones to, conquer the solar system, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely tend to agree with that. And it's it's interesting to see how space progress and like chaos in society seems to like be intertwined. We have this thing called the space conundrum, and like the first cycle of that was obviously the Apollo era,
Yeah.
and how the closer we got to landing on the moon, the crazier things got, um, in just like the world back on Earth. And it seems like we're on that same cycle right now, but I feel like we're only in like Gemini. I feel like we've still got a long way to go.
Right.
Um, so thinking of that and just like where we're going, if the goalposts are the moon and Mars, how do you approach that, in your mind? Is it, and I think I kind of heard it from what you were saying before, is it about using the moon as like a testing ground for developing all these technologies and then going to Mars, or do you just take it to Mars and give it a shot or
Yeah.
something else? I don't know.
Yeah. So you're right. I did kind of show my hand earlier. I believe right now, and maybe my mind gets changed in the next 5 or 10 years, but I really believe, after having looked at it pretty hard over the last 7+ years, that going to the moon and establishing a rhythm, a cadence of doing it successfully, safely, and putting in place an infrastructure. It doesn't have to be a colony, but an
Right.
infrastructure with, power and calm and habitats, and demonstrating, long-term stays. This is, more than 30 days. This is months.
Yeah.
I think that is really key. I really do think we can use lunar resources. I don't know how quickly we can turn lunar regolith into propellant. I'm not convinced that will happen really quickly, but I
Right.
think there are some propellants that can be made relatively quickly, and maybe those help us. But
Mm,
getting to the moon is about as hard in terms of uh, propulsion, energy. Getting from the Earth to the moon is about as hard as getting from the moon to Mars. I mean,
yeah.
there's so much of an advantage of starting at the moon and going to Mars, or at least having a lot of things pre and placed at or around the moon, right?
Mm,
So I really believe in that strongly. I'm sure whether it's SpaceX or Blue or another company, I'm sure somebody's going to try to go to Mars, and it'll be a footprints and flags mission.
yeah.
Um, but you know, I would love for, at least in parallel, if not first, let's show we can get to the moon. Let's do it the right way.
Mm,
Establish a presence, establish a um, set of rules on the moon that all the countries that go to the moon will behave in a reasonable way. I think
mm,
there's a lot of work to be done there, of course,
of
but
course.
then use that as a springboard. I'm excited about nuclear propulsion and
Mm,
the potential for that, getting us to Mars, quicker, and making that trip a little less daunting. But no
mm,
matter no matter what propulsion we're going to come up with in the next 20 years, at least, it's going to be a long mission
yeah.
and really daunting from a human health perspective and many other things. So
Mm.
I'm just a moon first advocate right now.
Yeah, I think Moon first, or Moon and Mars makes a lot of
Yeah,
sense
sure.
because, you have a backup plan that's within a rescue mission for the
Hmm.
moon. That's right off the bat.
Yeah.
Um, I think with the passing of the ISS, which will happen at some point, um, where is our beacon of international partnership? Like, even with everything that's been happening in the world
Yeah,
here, the fact that we still had that happening throughout all this, to me at
right.
least, was like, man, thank God this still exists. You know,
Yeah,
it's an example of us working together to survive.
yeah.
Do you see an international um, moon base happening?
Maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe that's a great question. I really hope a lot of people are talking about that because because that is really important. I agree with you. It's been a fantastic demonstration of how different countries can work together on, really hard things and ignore the things going on the ground.
yeah,
Another thing of getting off the ground to gain some perspective.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I do think so. When we were working on HLS, we had international partners on our
Mm,
team. We were actively looking at other international partners to work with us on things that will happen on the moon. And
mm,
then, of course, the mission required us to go to the Gateway, and that has many international partners involved. Now we'll see if that continues to be a part of the long-term plan. But I think the fact that it was such a big part of Gateway
mm,
signals that most of the countries who are investing significantly in space know that they're going to have to work together. So I
yeah,
think that means whether it's a space station at a Lagrange point or around the moon or on the lunar surface,
mm,
there has to be government collaboration and honestly industry collaboration. It's yeah, there are a few companies that have the bucks to do major things on their own, but
mm.
there's got to be standards established, and there's got to be ways that we can work together because things like a lunar infrastructure, a major space station, and obviously a moon mission is going to require a lot of different things that multiple commercial entities need to be involved in.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like, looking towards the future and kind of like preparing this next generation of STEM um, folks, the unconditionals and stuff that you talked about and human values, uh, how important is that to be taught in those fields? And I mean, to me, it feels like it was not really a thing taught when I went to school.
No, no,
Um,
it's not.
and it
It's not.
feels like a real, I mean, it's a good point for somebody who has emotional intelligence to go into those areas because they can be such a valuable, and I think you'd mentioned
Yeah.
that's kind of what you figured out. Um, how important is that to teach to that next generation? How do we do that?
Yeah, I think it's critical, so fortunately, I've always been interested in both the hard skills and the soft skills.
Mm,
I've talked about left side and right side of the brain, even though that's not really a thing, but you know what I mean.
yeah.
Um, that it doesn't necessarily come naturally, but I've always kind of liked to be able to do both on both sides. So it's a little more comfortable for me to get into that. It's definitely not for everybody, and especially hard for engineers, stereotypically.
Yeah.
But as you say, it's way beyond aerospace, right? It's
Mm,
way beyond just a an engineer's problem or just a science and technical person's problem. It's an everybody issue. To me, it's these kinds of values which are apolitical, a-religious.
mm,
They are not, denominational. In my book, I intentionally, there's a lot of talk about how religious practices talk about the importance of these values, but it's all religions, right? It's not
right.
it's not just one. All religions talk about the importance of love and gratitude and integrity and accountability and endeavor. And um, those things should be taught in school from a very early age.
Mm,
Those few of us who are fortunate enough to have great parents and great home lives, we get taught most of those at home,
mm,
hopefully. We still need more,
mm.
but there's so many people who don't, and even for those who do, it needs to be reinforced. So
Yep.
I've been thinking about, is there something I can do, and maybe that leads me to do something, in my next career. But in trying to help instill these values in the lives of school kids, and then obviously high school, college, and then when people are in the workplace.
Mm,
There's so much that we have to learn once we're in the thick of it,
mm.
and at that time, it makes it really hard to go discover integrity, right?
Yeah.
You
Too
really need
late
to
at that
have
point.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I think it's really important. And like I said, I'm thinking about what does that mean for me
Mm,
going forward. But I hope those of us who do know how important the values are in our lives in any role we play,
mm.
whether it's in the workplace or at home or whatever, will intentionally try to instill these values in our friends, in our family, and in ourselves in particular.
Yeah. I mean, there's so little that connects us these days that we have like
Right.
common ground on. And I
Right.
think um, the Apollo era had such a unique effect of unifying people. And I mean, you know, it was an arms race. So, I mean, having a defense level budget behind it helps a ton. Uh, and and the nation's focus, that's important.
Yeah.
But are when the accelerant for space progress in our next space cycle is the private sector, um, it's definitely something that really needs to be hit on. And not saying that the environment during those early years was healthy in
Right.
some areas, but you know, in today's world, you talked about the unconditionals being like a life support for engineers,
Mhm.
especially when things get wrong, get tough. And I know for me, um, some practice I've put into place recently, uh, dealing with some of these long-term difficult engineering problems, uh, is a gratitude journal.
Yeah.
So,
Good.
three things before I go to bed, three things when I wake up, and uh, it's been really important. I think for me, and I think this is true for a lot of engineers, being like some self-love. You know,
Yes.
you're so critical and like you want to put
Right.
yourself through the ringer to solve the problem.
Right.
And I needed that. So
That's great.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
been huge.
that's a great practice. That's really great. I totally agree with you. Yes, it is without having the national um, I guess the national energy behind the space program like we did in the 60s and well really the 60s. It kind of stopped before it got to the 70s, um,
Yeah.
for the most part. But yeah, it definitely luckily space isn't terribly partisan. I mean, yeah,
Mm,
it's still partisan in some ways, but I mean it's a lot less partisan than a lot of things. So that's good.
yeah.
But yeah, like you say, it's with it becoming more and more private, it's focused on dollars rather than um, doing the right thing necessarily.
Mm,
So it is important for us to make sure that these values are instilled in individuals so that hopefully they take them to the organizations that they're in. Again, I think starting at a young age and instilling those values so that, and the thing is, I talk about this in the book. I wish I could hit it even harder in the book that if you have these values, you're going to be successful, right?
yeah.
The point is the success of money and title and fame and all that stuff, that's not important. Some of that will happen if you have these values because you're naturally going to be the kind of person that
Mm,
people want to hire and that people want to promote and that people want to be in charge of teams and people want to put on the best projects. But the more important thing is you'll have that personal fulfillment and feel good about it because you know you're doing it the right way
right.
and everyone around you will want to behave the way you're behaving. So
Mm,
again, I just think having these values instilled at an early age, but having them as a workplace culture
yeah.
for these companies that are trying to do these super hard things, and it's so easy to make decisions that may not lead to the best outcomes if you're
Mm,
not really paying attention.
yeah. No, I definitely agree with you on that. And it's definitely tough. I mean, it's not an easy thing, and I think um even the way that things are, the way leaders approach things, I think there's a lot of leaders who don't focus on any of those things these
Right.
days. And I think part of it is we had our economy was really good for a while there. And so I think you could really squeeze the lemon for a while there.
Yeah,
And
I think you can look, I mean, the economy can be great and people try to eke out the last little bit, or the
yeah,
economy can be bad and people try to, get theirs. I
sure.
think things can go wrong in any situation,
Absolutely.
good or bad,
Yeah.
right? So that's why it's important for it to be unconditional. It can't
Yeah.
depend on the external situation. It can't depend on what you're going to get out of it.
Right.
Um, Accountability has to be no matter what's going to happen, I'm going to own it.
Hmm.
And good or bad, I'm going to own it. I'm going to live with the results, and then I'm going to, if it goes bad, I'm going to go fix it.
Yeah.
And so if it's unconditional, then it doesn't matter what the economy is doing. It doesn't matter what other companies are doing. It doesn't
Hmm.
matter even what your neighbors are doing, as long as you're focused on, I'm going to do what's right no matter what.
Yeah. No. Well said. Well said. Y- Tell me more about the process of the book. How was writing that?
Yeah, it was fun. I like I said, I do enjoy spending time on the hard skills and the soft skills, humanities and the engineering. So for me, it's fun.
Hmm.
I had not ever written something like this. I've
Hmm.
done other writing before, but very different. A lot of research. So somebody else asked me a similar question, and I said, there's part of it for me does require some systematic thinking,
Hmm.
the system engineering that goes into, what are the requirements and um, what are the functions of each of these parts. But it's what's all the stuff that I want to put together, and then how do I organize it? I
Hmm.
really enjoy that. I enjoy organizing things. I enjoy seeing the big picture and then seeing how it fits together. So putting that outline together that says, okay, this is how at a first cut how it might flow.
Hmm.
And then I actually go to the other side, the more, humanity side, emotional side, whatever, and start to just write about this. And that's where you got to be a little less analytical and a little
Hmm.
more just let it go, let it flow.
Yeah.
And so there's some of that too. And then it goes back and forth. You let it flow, and then you realize that's a bunch of gobbledygook, and you gotta do a little systematic work again. But
Yeah.
that was fun for me to be able to go back and forth. And I'm sure when people look at the book and see how I've organized it, they're going to say, "Oh, I see. Yeah, that was an engineer."
Hmm.
But hopefully there's some other stuff in it that also does get into the emotion and the philosophy and some of the what's really important from just a personal perspective. And then when I got to the point of doing the editing and actually going through the self-publishing process and
Hmm.
getting it out to all the online platforms and available in physical stores and stuff, that's all new to me as well. So that was fun.
Yeah. Do you think being an engineer kind of prepared you for the grunt work side of things of just like getting in there and solving problems?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know there are plenty of engineers who don't necessarily like getting into the weeds, but
Hmm.
I I think I probably learned early on. Some of my early career jobs were um, I wasn't a software engineer, but I did a lot of coding to try to. I
Hmm.
was mainly focused in propulsion, but did a lot of modeling and analysis. So, getting into the code and really finding, okay, where are things going wrong, that teaches you to dig in
Hmm.
and don't go home until it's fixed, right? And
Right.
so I had a good bit of that, and that's just sort of been part of the way I do things. So I definitely don't mind working hard when I know there's a good result coming,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. No, and I think especially having gone for aerospace engineering, like you picked something that was pretty grand in the scheme of things, you know? So like the
Right.
problem being so like enticing, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And you know this. You go through, it's not just aerospace, it's any engineering, but
Yep.
you struggle through it. It's really hard. You feel great, that you've completed it, and then you get out in the workforce, and that's completely different than what you
Yeah.
studied in school, right? Um, but but you learned a lot of habits, in
Mm,
particular, how to work hard,
hmm.
how to know what you're going to spend time on. Hey, I've got five things to do, but I've only got time to do two of them. Which two?
Mm,
That to me is as valuable as anything I learned.
yeah. Yeah, someone was I think it was a comedy bit about engineers, but um they mentioned that engineers keep the world moving, and I think that's like a pretty good way of explaining like
Yeah,
the speed and also the totality of what you need to do to like go make this problem work, you know?
right, right. Yeah, yeah. We may be to blame for, things going too fast and
Yeah.
things getting too complicated, but yes, we do keep things moving.
Yeah, and that seems to be the posture that I think you kind of have to take as the engineer. It's like, tell, it's okay if you're telling me to back off a little bit. Like we're at a good spot.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Um, for those who are looking to get into the space industry, do you have any advice for them?
I can speak from the perspective of a person who's hired um, many engineers. Like I said, the things that I looked for were, good work ethic, which usually shows up in at least decent grades, but then
Mm,
pretty well-rounded, willing to be involved in a number of things, beyond just school, and then show a passion for or a real interest in space. Hey, I was part of the club. Maybe I was a chemical engineer, but I was part of the space hardware club, or I was part
mm,
of the rocket team. And I've gone to hear lectures by astronauts, or I've gone to the Space and Rocket Center 100 times, whatever it is that
right.
shows, hey, you're really interested in this, and that makes it likely that you're going to um, invest yourself in the
Mm,
job. And then, of course, EQ matters. So, is the person going to be able to get along with the team, and is the person gonna be able to deal with working extra hours when it's necessary, and
mm,
all those kinds of things. But in general, I think show that you got a good work ethic, you're well-rounded, and in particular that you have an interest in what you're going after.
yeah. No, thank you. I think that's really good advice. Um, there's a lot of things I'd like to ask you to close out, but um, can you talk to me a little bit more about your journey, like wanting to be an astronaut? I think we were going to touch a little bit more on that.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, interesting story. So the after my sophomore year of college, I was able to do an internship at NASA Langley
Mm.
in Virginia, and was working for a guy who was actually part of the Mars Pathfinder team,
Oh,
and so great mentor. And I was
mm.
running trajectories for going to Mars and stuff. But
Cool.
um, I at that time wanted to be an astronaut still. And I thought, hey, what better time to find out what it really takes? I'm just going to call the astronaut doctor. So this was before the internet. I mean, before the internet was available
Popular.
enough.
Yeah, yeah.
I couldn't Google it. I literally had to use phone books and search through, the NASA Johnson
Nice.
line until but I got to the doctor, and I kind of knew this going in, but my
Mm,
eyes weren't good
mm,
enough. And at the time, still, you had to have pretty good vision, and mine weren't close. So,
yeah.
I was devastated. It was open and closed, no question. You couldn't have LASIK back then; that wasn't allowed.
Yeah.
So that was it.
Mm,
And luckily, I was working on this cool project with a cool guy and a great team. And it was it didn't take too long for me to say, okay, this is not a bad backup option. Um, I'll
mm.
stick with it. And that was, that's been a good decision. But more recently, I was here in Huntsville at a dinner, and Mike Massimino was
Oh
the
yeah.
keynote speaker. And he came and spoke, and he's a fantastic speaker.
He's great.
And all of us got a copy of one of his books. The book is, I think, Spaceman. Great
Mm,
book. I mean, his personality comes out in the pages, so it's worth reading. But he talks in the book about he always wanted to be an astronaut and he went to NASA Johnson and did a ton of stuff there,
Mhm.
but he was rejected for his vision. But what he did was train his eyes to get better. And he did
Wow.
it again and again and again and again. I mean, I don't remember how long it took, but it wasn't overnight, but he trained his eyes to be able to pass the test. And I kind of looked at that, this is many years after being rejected myself. And I kind of looked at that and said, Mike's purpose
Mhm.
was stronger than mine. He had
Mhm.
really invested himself so much in wanting to be an astronaut that he was willing to go do everything it took. And he did it
Mhm.
and worked on the Hubble Space Telescope and all that. I wasn't willing to do that. My purpose wasn't strong enough to be an astronaut. And I sort of, tongue in cheek in the book say, you know, I had a problem. I had a vision problem. My eyes weren't good enough, but my vision for being an astronaut
Mhm.
wasn't strong enough either. And, it's a good lesson for me. I mean, I've had a
Yeah.
fantastic career. I wouldn't trade it. But, I would say to people, if that's something that you really, really want to do, and that really is your dream, you got to go all the way. It doesn't mean you'll get it, but
Yeah.
you'll have a better chance. And for Mike, he did eventually get it. So I thought that was a great story. Love reading about Mike and seeing his success, but it was a great reminder to me that I could have done things differently,
Mhm.
and might have been able to be an astronaut. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, with the way that things have kind of evolved, especially the term astronaut, um, I mean, as we start to figure out what more types of people can do to go into space, if that opens up, are you down?
I am always down. I have always been down. You know, don't tell my wife, but if there were an opportunity to go to Mars and not come back, I would probably do it.
Mm.
But going to the moon, absolutely, and as soon as I can afford it and don't have to wait in a line a million people long, I will buy a ticket to
Yeah.
go on one of these other missions. So, yes, down every day of the week and can't wait. I hope I can do it in my lifetime,
Mm.
but I'm excited that so many other people will be able to.
Yeah. So, one last thing. So you mentioned you want to go to Mars and stay there. Could you give a little bit more on the why? Because I love hearing people, that want to go. I think it's so cool.
I If I had that opportunity, I would hope I were a little bit older so that I would have, lived more of my life and I could say, okay,
Mm.
this is a good way to go. If you got to go, no better way to go than this. But
Hmm.
no, I doing something that's never been done before, even if it takes your life, I don't know. It's been a dream of mine to be an
Mm.
astronaut and, thinking about space for 30 years and all those things. That to me is kind of the culmination. So, like I said, my family probably wouldn't agree and probably wouldn't let me go, but they'd probably shoot me in the leg so I couldn't go. But I it does not shock me at all that
Mm.
many people have signed up for previous missions that were to go to Mars and not come back. It doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
I mean, I would probably do it.
Yeah. I mean, talk about being in the record books. I mean, like the first people that came to America. I mean, that's kind
Yeah.
of it feels like
It,
the
it,
pull of
it
it, right?
is.
Like,
Yeah. For me, it's not even about the record book so much as
mm,
just the experience. I mean,
yeah.
I would hope that I would at least have the opportunity to provide back to Earth
Mm,
what that experience is like, because I'd hate to have to just keep it to myself.
right.
But that experience and being able to share it with others,
Mm,
that to me is worth it. Who cares what the record books say?
yeah. Yeah. I think that is really cool. And so we interviewed Dr. Sarah Lynn Mark of
Right. Yeah, I saw that.
yeah, and that's what she was saying was her recommendation was the people that should go on those first missions to Mars are people that have lived their life are in that older stage of life because the long-term effects of space
Right.
you will have naturally probably passed away at
Mhm.
that point when those are a thing. So you kind of fit and even thinking about sending a team there's definitely a challenge of sending someone with youth to
Yeah.
Mars, you know, just
Yeah.
a survival thing and
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I think there's
Yeah,
a
I've seen
really
studies
strat
about that too, and
yeah,
very often it says, send people in their 50s, and I'm like, hey, that's not that old anymore. But
right.
but people who've lived their lives, even, and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like I've seen things that say the the expected effects of radiation on older people are less than on younger people. But in any
Mm,
case, just as you said, the fact that maybe we don't feel as bad if if these people have lived full lives on the Earth, and presumably if they get selected for a Mars mission, they will have.
mm,
But yeah, people are going to want to go for the same reasons that I said, and probably others.
yeah. No, I think that's super cool. Well, Andy, thank you for joining me on the
Yeah,
podcast and sharing
it's
your
been a
story. And
blast.
yeah, absolutely. Is there anything last minute that you want, last thoughts that you wanted to share?
Well, thanks for the opportunity. No, we covered everything that I would have hoped and more. And you and I'm sure, could talk for days on
Yeah.
these topics. I certainly can talk about space forever. I'd love for people to check out more about the book. You can go to andycrockerbooks.com and find a link there to find the book pretty much anywhere. But yeah, check it out. There's space stories and a lot about values that I think will really matter to a lot of people.
No, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks.
And folks, thank you for joining us. This has been another episode of People of Space and of Today in Space. So thanks for joining us. Stay curious, spread love, spread science, and we'll see you on the next episode. See ya.